Listen to me carefully. I'm about to share something with you that most people will never understand in their entire lifetime. And I need you to hear this not just with your ears, but with the deepest part of your spirit. There is a woman somewhere right now who is tired of being overlooked. She's tired of being walked past like she's invisible. She's tired of praying prayers that seem to bounce off the ceiling. She's tired of giving her best and watching others who do far less receive the recognition, the opportunities, the favor she desperately longs for. And if I'm describing you right now, I need you to stop everything and pay attention to what I'm about to tell you. Because here's the truth that nobody wants to say out loud. God has never been in the business of responding to need. Let me say that again so it can sink deep into your spirit. God does not respond to need. If God responded to need, every hungry child would be fed tonight. Every sick person would be healed by morning. Every broken heart would be mended by sunrise. But that's not how the kingdom operates. God responds to something entirely different. He responds to quality. He responds to character. He responds to women who have developed themselves into vessels that He can trust with His glory, His resources, His kingdom assignments. And I know that might sound harsh to your ears. I know it might make you uncomfortable. But I would rather tell you the truth that sets you free than a lie that keeps you comfortable in your prison. Because right now, in this very moment, there are 7 specific qualities that make a woman completely irresistible to both heaven and earth. 7 qualities that cause God Himself to stop and take notice. 7 qualities that make men of valor seek you out. 7 qualities that position you for the kind of favor that cannot be manufactured, manipulated, or faked. You see, I've spent decades studying human behavior, leadership, and the kingdom principles that govern how God moves in the earth. And I've discovered something that changed my entire understanding of why some women live in perpetual struggle, while others seem to walk in continuous favor. It has nothing to do with their beauty, though many of them are beautiful. It has nothing to do with their background, because many came from places of absolute poverty and pain. It has everything to do with the quality of character they've cultivated in the secret place where nobody's watching. I've watched women with multiple degrees remain unemployed and unfulfilled. I've seen women with incredible talent sit on the sidelines of their own destiny. And then I've witnessed women with half the education and a quarter of the natural ability walk into rooms and command attention from everyone present, including God. What's the difference? The difference is in these 7 qualities that I'm about to share with you. And I promise you this, if you will allow the Holy Spirit to develop these qualities in you, you will never be overlooked again. Not by God, not by man, not by destiny itself. Now, before I share these 7 qualities with you, I need to establish something crucial about how the kingdom operates, because most people have been taught a version of faith that simply doesn't work. They've been taught that if you just pray hard enough, if you just believe strong enough, if you just cry loud enough, God will respond to you. And when that doesn't happen, they become bitter. They become angry at God. They start questioning whether God even sees them, whether God even cares, whether God is even real. But here's what they don't understand. God has already provided everything you need. Before you were even born, before you took your first breath, God had already loaded your life with divine provision, divine connections, divine opportunities, and divine favor. The problem is not that God hasn't given it. The problem is that you haven't developed the character capacity to steward what He's already released. It's like trying to pour the Pacific Ocean into a Dixie cup and then getting angry that the ocean won't fit. The ocean isn't the problem. The size of your vessel is the problem. And this is where most teaching misses the mark completely. We've created a culture of beggars in the body of Christ. People coming to God constantly asking for what He's already given, instead of becoming who He's called them to be so they can access what's already been provided. God is not holding anything back from you. You are holding yourself back from it because you haven't developed the qualities necessary to carry what He wants to give you. Think about this for a moment. If I handed $1 million to someone who has never managed $100 responsibly, what would happen? They would lose it all within months, maybe weeks. Not because they're bad people, but because they haven't developed the character capacity to steward that level of resource. The problem isn't the money. The problem is the vessel. And so God, in His infinite wisdom and mercy, doesn't give you what you ask for. He gives you what you can handle. He gives you what matches the size of your character. This is why you see women who seem less qualified than you getting opportunities you've prayed for. It's not that God loves them more. It's not that they're more special. It's not that life is unfair. It's that they've developed qualities that make them trustworthy carriers of that level of blessing. And until you develop those same qualities, you will keep asking and wondering why heaven seems silent. But today that changes. Today I'm going to show you exactly what those qualities are. I'm going to show you how to develop them. And I'm going to show you why, once you have them, you become someone that neither God nor man can afford to ignore. Because a woman operating in these 7 qualities is a woman who has positioned herself at the intersection of divine purpose and earthly manifestation. She becomes a portal through which heaven invades earth. And everybody wants to be around that kind of woman, because everybody wants access to what she carries. So let me take you on a journey into the heart of what makes a woman truly valuable. Not valuable according to Instagram standards, or magazine covers, or what society says makes you worthy. I'm talking about the kind of value that makes the creator of the universe lean in and say, now that's a woman I can work with. That's a woman I can trust with my glory. That's a woman who can handle what I want to release through her. And when God says that about you, everything shifts, everything changes, and you step into a dimension of favor that most people only dream about. Are you ready? Because what I'm about to share with you has the power to completely transform your life, but only if you're willing to let go of who you've been and embrace who you're called to become. Only if you're willing to do the hard internal work that nobody sees, so you can live the blessed external life that everyone notices. Only if you're willing to stop blaming everyone for where you are and take full responsibility for developing the character that attracts the life you desire. The first quality that makes a woman impossible to ignore is this. She carries an unshakable sense of purpose. And I'm not talking about knowing your life's purpose in some vague, abstract way. I'm talking about a woman who wakes up every single morning knowing exactly why God planted breath in her lungs. She knows what she was created to accomplish. She knows what problem she was born to solve. She knows what gap in the earth her existence is meant to fill. And because she knows this, she doesn't waste time on things that don't align with her assignment. You see, most people drift through life reacting to circumstances instead of creating with intention. They're like ships without rudders, being tossed by every wave of opinion, every storm of emotion, every wind of opportunity that blows their direction. But a woman of purpose is different. She's like a guided missile locked onto a target. She might adjust her path, she might navigate around obstacles, but she never loses sight of where she's going. And let me tell you why this matters so much. When a woman knows her purpose, she becomes selective. She becomes protective of her time, her energy, her resources, her relationships. She understands that every yes to something that doesn't serve her purpose is a no to something that does. She understands that her life is not about collecting experiences or impressing people or keeping up with what everyone else is doing. Her life is about fulfilling the specific mandate that God wrote into her DNA before the foundation of the world. This kind of woman makes God sit up and pay attention because God is purpose-driven. Everything God creates has a specific function. The sun doesn't wake up and wonder what to do today. It does what it was created to do. The ocean doesn't question its boundaries. It operates within its divine design. And when God sees a woman who has discovered her purpose and aligned her entire life around fulfilling it, he says, finally, someone who understands how my kingdom operates. Someone I can pour resources into because I know she won't waste them on distractions. I remember meeting a young woman years ago who came to one of my leadership conferences. She was probably in her mid-20s, didn't come from money, didn't have impressive credentials, but there was something different about her. While everyone else was networking and trying to make connections and hand out business cards, she sat in the front row with a notebook, writing down every principle I taught like her life depended on it. During the breaks, while others were taking selfies and chatting, she found a quiet corner and was processing what she'd learned. I noticed her because purpose has a posture. You can see it in how a person carries themselves. You can hear it in the questions they ask. You can feel it in their presence. And this young woman radiated purpose. So I approached her during one of the breaks and asked her what she was working on. And she looked me right in the eyes and said, Dr. Munroe, I was born to transform the education system in my nation. I grew up in poverty, but I had one teacher who believed in me, and that changed the trajectory of my entire life. And I realized that there are millions of children who will never reach their potential because no one believes in them. So I'm building a network of schools that doesn't just educate children but awakens their sense of purpose. Now at that time, she didn't have funding. She didn't have a team. She didn't even have a building. But she had something far more valuable. She had clarity of purpose. And I watched over the next decade as doors opened for her that were closed to people with far more resources. I watched as investors sought her out. I watched as governments gave her land. I watched as talented educators left high-paying positions to join her team. Why? Because purpose is magnetic. Purpose attracts provision. And a woman who knows her purpose becomes someone that both heaven and earth invest in because everyone can see that she's going somewhere specific. But here's what most people don't understand about purpose. It's not something you invent. It's something you discover. Your purpose was embedded in you before you were born. It's written in your passions, your pains, your experiences, your abilities. The question is not what should my purpose be. The question is what is the purpose that God already placed inside me. And when you discover that, when you align your life with that, everything else begins to fall into place. The second quality that makes a woman irresistible to God and man is this: she has mastered the art of self-governance. Now this might sound like a sophisticated concept, but let me break it down for you in the simplest terms. Self-governance means you don't need someone else to control you because you control yourself. It means you don't need external rules to make you do right because you have internal principles that guide your decisions. It means you can be trusted in the dark because you live the same way whether anyone's watching or not. Let me tell you something that might shock you. The greatest form of leadership is self-leadership. If you cannot lead yourself, you have no business trying to lead anyone else. And a woman who has mastered self-governance is a woman who has won the most important battle any human being can ever fight, the battle for self-control. She has conquered her emotions. She has disciplined her appetites. She has trained her thoughts. She has harnessed her tongue. And because of this, she becomes someone that God can trust with greater authority. You know why God doesn't give everyone everything they ask for? Because most people can't even govern themselves. They're slaves to their feelings. When they feel happy, they make promises. When they feel sad, they break promises. When they feel angry, they destroy relationships. When they feel lonely, they compromise their standards. They're being led by emotions instead of leading their emotions. And God looks at that and says, if you can't control yourself, how can I trust you to steward my resources, my people, my kingdom assignments? But a woman who has developed self-governance is different. She feels the emotion, but she doesn't let the emotion make her decisions. She acknowledges the temptation, but she doesn't bow to it. She experiences the disappointment, but she doesn't let it derail her purpose. She's learned to create space between stimulus and response, and in that space she exercises choice. That's power. That's true freedom. And that's what makes her irresistible. I've seen marriages destroyed because someone couldn't govern their appetite. I've seen businesses collapse because someone couldn't govern their temper. I've seen ministries implode because someone couldn't govern their ego. And in every single case, it wasn't that they didn't have talent or opportunity or resources. They just didn't have self-governance. Self-governance is the difference between influence and chaos. It's what separates leaders who build legacies from those who leave wreckage. You see, you can have all the gifts in the world, all the charisma, all the natural talent, but if you can't govern yourself, you'll never govern anything of lasting value. Let me tell you what I mean by self-governance. It's not just about willpower or discipline, though those are part of it. Self-governance is the ability to manage your emotions when they're screaming at you to react. It's the capacity to delay gratification when everything in you wants immediate satisfaction. It's the strength to say no to yourself when your appetites are demanding yes. I've watched leaders destroy in seconds what took decades to build. And it always starts with a failure of self-governance. It might be an unguarded moment with the wrong person. It might be a financial decision made in secret. It might be an angry outburst that reveals what's really been brewing inside. The public fall is always preceded by a private failure to govern oneself. Think about it this way. Every great kingdom in history fell from within before it fell from without. The enemy didn't have to breach the walls because someone on the inside opened the gates. That's what happens when you don't govern yourself. You become your own worst enemy. You sabotage your own success. You undermine your own influence. I remember counseling a young pastor who had an incredible gift for communication. People were drawn to him. His church was growing rapidly. The opportunities were multiplying. But he came to me troubled. He said, "Dr. Munroe, I'm afraid of what's happening inside me. The attention, the admiration, the affirmation, I'm starting to need it. I'm starting to perform for it. I'm making decisions based on what will get me the biggest response, not what's right." That young man had something rare: self-awareness. He recognized the internal threat before it became an external crisis. We worked on establishing boundaries, accountability structures, and daily practices that would help him govern his need for validation. Today, years later, he's still leading effectively because he learned to govern himself. But I've seen the opposite too many times to count. Leaders who refuse to acknowledge their internal struggles until those struggles became public scandals. Here's what most people don't understand about leadership failures. They're never sudden. They're always gradual. It's never an explosion. It's an erosion. The leader who falls morally didn't wake up one morning and decide to destroy everything. No, they made a series of small compromises. They ignored warning signs. They stopped being honest with themselves. Months, maybe years, before the public failure. I remember sitting in a conference room with a group of executives when news broke about a major Christian leader's fall from grace. The reaction in that room was fascinating. Everyone was shocked, devastated even. But here's what struck me: nobody should have been surprised. The signs were there: the isolation, the defensiveness, the inability to receive correction, the small ethical shortcuts that everyone noticed but nobody addressed. You see, when you refuse to deal with your inner darkness, it doesn't just disappear, it grows, it gains strength, and eventually it demands expression. This is why Jesus was so direct about dealing with sin internally before it manifests externally. He understood human nature. He knew that what you tolerate in private, you'll eventually practice in public. Let me give you a framework that has helped me immensely. I call it the 4 chambers of influence. Every leader operates in 4 chambers: the private chamber where only you and God exist, the personal chamber where your closest relationships dwell, the professional chamber where your work happens, and the public chamber where your reputation lives. Here's the principle: what happens in the private chamber always. There are no exceptions to this rule. If you're dishonest with yourself privately, you'll eventually be dishonest publicly. If you harbor bitterness privately, you'll eventually express toxicity publicly. The progression is inevitable. Most leaders spend all their energy managing the public chamber, their image, their brand, their reputation, but they neglect the private chamber where their character is actually formed. This is backwards. When you get the private chamber right, everything else flows naturally. Think about it. When a seed is planted in the ground, nobody sees it germinating. It's buried in darkness, surrounded by soil, completely hidden from view. But in that invisible season, everything essential is happening. The roots are pushing down. The DNA is activating. The life force is organizing itself. And only after all that hidden preparation does the sprout finally break through the surface. Your life works the same way. The most important transformations happen in secret, not on social media, not in boardrooms or conference halls. But in those quiet moments when nobody is watching, when nobody is applauding, when there are no cameras, no audiences, no recognition, this is where you decide whether you'll check your phone or read that chapter. This is where you choose whether you'll surrender to mediocrity or push through resistance. This is where discipline either takes root or withers. These small private decisions compound over time into the person you become. I've counseled leaders from every continent, and I can tell you something with absolute certainty. The ones who endure, the ones who lead with integrity, the ones who weather crisis and criticism, they all have one thing in common. They built themselves in private long before the public ever knew their names. Moses spent 40 years in the wilderness before he led millions. Joseph endured years in prison before he governed Egypt. David tended sheep in obscurity before he wore a crown. Jesus himself spent 30 years in preparation for 3 years of public ministry. The pattern is unmistakable. Private preparation precedes public manifestation. But we've reversed this order. We want the platform before we've developed the substance. We want the influence before we've cultivated the character. We want the title before we've mastered the discipline. And when we get what we're not prepared for, we self-destruct. You see it all the time. The lottery winner who's broke within 5 years. The celebrity who implodes under pressure. The leader whose hidden character flaws eventually destroy their public legacy. Why? Because they never did the private work. They never built the inner infrastructure to sustain the outer success. They never developed the roots to support the fruit. They were all branches and no foundation. Let me ask you something personal. What are you like when nobody's watching? Not when you're performing. Not when you're being evaluated. But when it's just you alone with your thoughts, your habits, your choices. That's the real you. This is why so many people are successful in public but broken in private. They've mastered the performance but neglected the person. They've polished the image while the soul rusts. You know what's fascinating? Jesus never prayed in public without praying more in private. The miracles the crowd saw were the overflow of the communion no one witnessed. His public authority was rooted in private surrender. That's the pattern of true greatness. What you cultivate in secret you'll demonstrate in public. What you tolerate in private will eventually manifest publicly. I've watched leaders build empires on stages while losing their families behind closed doors. I've seen preachers move thousands with words they don't live by at home. The applause was loud, but the collapse was inevitable. Because you cannot sustain publicly what you don't maintain privately. Your private disciplines determine your public dimensions. Your secret habits shape your visible harvest. The person you are when no one's looking is the foundation everything else is built upon. And here's what most people miss. Your private life doesn't just affect you, it affects everyone connected to you. Your children don't just hear what you preach, they inherit what you practice. Your team doesn't just follow your vision, they absorb your values. The impact of your hidden life ripples far beyond what you can see. This is why character isn't optional for anyone serious about legacy. You can fake competence for a season. You can manufacture charisma for a moment. But character only comes from consistent choices made when it costs you something and no one will ever know. David was anointed king in a private ceremony, but he spent years alone with sheep before he faced Goliath. The private fields prepared him for the public fight. Moses spent 40 years in obscurity before he confronted Pharaoh. Joseph maintained integrity in prison before he managed a nation. God never promotes publicly what hasn't been proven privately. Your character in private determines your capacity in public. What you do when no one is watching, when there's no camera, no audience, no applause, that reveals who you really are. And here's what most people don't understand. Hidden seasons aren't punishment. They're preparation. Think about David again. While he was in those fields watching sheep, he wasn't just passing time. He was developing the courage to face lions and bears. He was learning to worship in solitude. He was building an intimate relationship with God that would sustain him through betrayal, warfare, and the complexity of kingship. Nobody saw those battles. Nobody wrote songs about the teenage boy who killed a lion with his bare hands to protect his father's sheep. But God saw, and that private faithfulness qualified him for public assignment. You see, the hidden place is where God does his deepest work. It's where he strips away your need for external validation. It's where he breaks your addiction to applause. It's where he teaches you to draw your identity not from what people say about you, but from what he says about you. And that transformation, that metamorphosis of character, it cannot happen under the spotlight. I want you to hear this. If you're in a season right now where nobody knows your name, where your gifts seem unrecognized, where you feel invisible, you're in the perfect position for promotion. Because God is preparing you for something your current character cannot sustain. He's building infrastructure in your spirit to support the weight of what he's about to release in your life. The problem is, we want the palace before we've proven ourselves in the prison. We want the platform before we've developed the perseverance. We want the influence before we've established the integrity. And this is why so many people today are angry at their process. They're frustrated with their preparation. They're bitter about the very season that's designed to make them ready for where they're asking to go. Listen, you cannot skip levels in the school of greatness. You cannot microwave maturity. You cannot download character from the internet. There are no shortcuts to your destiny. Only the path that God has laid out. And that path always includes preparation that most people don't want to endure. Joseph didn't get bitter in the prison. He got better. While everyone else was complaining about their conditions, Joseph was developing his capacity. While others were blaming their circumstances, Joseph was building his character. He understood something profound. The place you're in is not designed to break you. It's designed to make you. See, here's what I've learned after decades of studying leadership and human potential. Your current frustration is often evidence that you're being prepared for something you've been praying for. That difficult boss, he might be teaching you patience you'll need when you lead thousands. That financial struggle, it might be developing the stewardship you'll need when you manage millions. That betrayal, it might be building the forgiveness you'll need when you walk in influence. The prison is not punishment, it's preparation. Potiphar's house was preparation. The pit was preparation. And yes, even the false accusation was preparation. Because when you finally get to your palace, you're going to need the wisdom you gained in the prison, the integrity you developed in Potiphar's house, and the faith you built in the pit. Joseph never would have survived the palace without the prison. The crown would have crushed him if he hadn't first been trained by the chains. The power would have corrupted him if the process hadn't first purified him. And here's what most people miss. The prison was not a punishment, it was a preparation center. It was God's training academy, His leadership institute, His character development program. Every false accusation was a lesson in forgiveness. Every lonely night was a tutorial in trust. Every day of waiting was a master class in patience. You see, God doesn't just call us to positions, He prepares us for them. And the preparation is always proportional to the assignment. The bigger the throne, the deeper the pit. The higher the calling, the longer the process. The greater the influence, the more intense the refining. Think about this. When Joseph finally stood before Pharaoh, he didn't just interpret a dream. He presented a comprehensive economic plan for an entire nation. He outlined a 7-year strategy for agricultural surplus management, resource allocation, and wealth distribution. Where did a shepherd boy learn national economics? Where did a slave acquire strategic planning skills? Where did a prisoner develop administrative expertise? In the waiting rooms of life. In the dark seasons that nobody celebrated. In those years when it looked like nothing was happening, everything was happening. God was downloading wisdom while Joseph was locked down. The Holy Spirit was teaching policy development while he was in prison development. Heaven was conducting a leadership seminar, while earth thought he was simply serving a sentence. And when the moment came, when Pharaoh said, "Can we find anyone like this man, one in whom is the Spirit of God?" Joseph was ready. Not just ready with an answer, but ready with the character to handle the responsibility that would follow that answer. He had the interpretation and the integrity. He had the gift and the godliness. He had the prophetic insight and the personal discipline. This is why you cannot rush your process. This is why shortcuts are so dangerous. When you skip the preparation and jump to the position, you end up with authority you cannot manage, influence you cannot steward, and power you cannot control. You become a cautionary tale instead of a legacy builder. You see, history is littered with people who got what they wanted before they were ready for it. Lottery winners who were millionaires on Tuesday and bankrupt by Friday. Athletes who rose to fame without character development and destroyed themselves with the very resources meant to elevate them. Leaders who inherited positions they never prepared for, and they took entire organizations down with them. Why does this happen? Because the weight of success requires the strength of preparation. If your foundation cannot bear the structure, the entire building collapses. And here's what breaks my heart. People don't just lose the blessing when they're unprepared. They lose their credibility. They lose their relationships. They lose their peace. They lose themselves. I've watched it happen too many times. A young entrepreneur who wanted the business without building the character. He got the contracts, the clients, the revenue, but he didn't have the integrity to handle it. He cut corners. He made promises he couldn't keep. He burned bridges. He didn't know he'd need to cross again. Within 2 years, the business was gone, and so was his reputation. Contrast that with someone who spent years in obscurity, learning, failing privately, building discipline in the dark. When their moment came, they were ready. Not just ready with skills, but ready with wisdom, ready with restraint, ready with the emotional intelligence to navigate success without being destroyed by it. This is the difference between a meteor and a star. A meteor blazes bright and burns out fast. Everyone sees it for a moment, and then it's gone. But a star shines for generations because it has substance. It has depth, staying power. It was formed under pressure, refined over time, and it burns with purpose, not just heat. Here's the question you need to ask yourself. Am I building to last, or am I just trying to arrive? Because if all you want is to arrive, you'll get there empty. You'll have the title, the platform, the appearance of success, but nothing inside to sustain it. And when the test comes, and trust me, it will come, you will collapse under the weight of your own elevation. That's why Jesus spent 40 days in the wilderness before he preached a single sermon. That's why Moses spent 40 years in the desert before he led a nation. That's why David tended sheep in obscurity before he wore a crown. The delay was not a detour. The waiting was not wasted. It was preparation. It was testing. It was the proving ground where character is forged and capacity is stretched. And here's what most people miss. The wilderness doesn't just test your strength. It reveals your source. When everything is stripped away, when there's no audience, no applause, no affirmation from people, where do you turn? Do you crumble? Do you complain? Or do you dig deeper into the presence of God and discover that He alone is enough? That's the question the waiting answers. Not whether you're talented enough, not whether you're smart enough, but whether you're rooted enough. Whether your identity is anchored in who God says you are, or in what people think about you. Because if your identity is tied to external validation, the moment that validation is removed, you'll lose yourself. I've watched people step into platforms they weren't prepared for. I've seen them elevated before they were tested. And without fail, the same thing happens. They start strong. The crowds love them. The opportunities multiply. But behind the scenes, there's chaos. There's pride. There's insecurity masked as confidence. And eventually the cracks show. Not because they lack talent, but because they lack foundation. You cannot sustain what you haven't been prepared to carry. You cannot steward influence you haven't been tested to handle. And you cannot lead people further than you've gone yourself. That's why God doesn't rush your process. He's not interested in making you famous. He's committed to making you faithful. He's not trying to make you known. He's trying to make you whole. And wholeness takes time. It requires you to confront the parts of yourself you've been avoiding, the bitterness you've buried, the fears you've ignored, the pride you've justified. God will use the waiting to surface all of it. Not to shame you, but to heal you. Because you cannot carry tomorrow's assignment with yesterday's unhealed wounds. And here's what you must understand. Asterisk. Asterisk. The healing doesn't happen on your timetable. Asterisk, asterisk. You want microwave deliverance, but God is cooking you slow in the crock pot of His presence. You want instant transformation, but He's doing surgery with precision. You cannot rush what God is removing. You cannot accelerate what He is rebuilding in you. I've watched people try to shortcut the healing process. They read 3 books, attend 2 conferences, and declare themselves delivered. But 6 months later, the same pattern shows up with a different face. Why? Because they never let God get to the root. They trimmed the leaves but left the root system intact. Asterisk, asterisk. True healing goes deep. Asterisk. It's not about behavior modification, it's about identity reconstruction. God is not just trying to change what you do, He's redefining who you understand yourself to be. And that takes time. That takes stillness. That takes you being honest enough to sit in His presence without the mask, without the script, without the performance. The waiting becomes your excavation site. Every day you don't see the promise, God is digging deeper. Every moment you feel forgotten, He's actually uncovering another layer of false foundation you built your life on. He's showing you where you've been getting your worth from applause instead of His approval. Where you've been finding your security in people's opinions instead of His word. Where you've been building your identity on achievement instead of His acceptance. And listen, this is uncomfortable, asterisk. Nobody likes having their foundation examined. Nobody volunteers to have their coping mechanisms removed. But God loves you too much to promote you while you're still fragile in places that your next level will pressure. He loves you too much to give you influence while you're still wounded in ways that will cause you to wound others. I've seen gifted people destroy their own destiny because they got there before they were healed. They had the anointing but not the character. They had the platform but not the integrity. They had the audience but not the humility. And everything collapsed, not because God wasn't with them, but because they built on an unhealed foundation. Asterisk. God will protect your future by pausing your present. Asterisk. God will protect your future by pausing your present. Asterisk. He will delay the blessing to complete the healing. And you've got to trust that delay. You've got to believe that what He's doing in the unseen is more valuable than what you're frustrated about not seeing. Because here's what I've learned. God's delays are not denials. They're divine appointments for transformation. Every season of waiting is actually a season of preparation. And if you can shift your perspective from why is this taking so long, to what is He preparing me for, everything changes. You see, we live in a microwave culture, but God operates a crock-pot kingdom. We want instant results. We want overnight success. We want the blessing to arrive by express delivery. But God is slow cooking something in you that cannot be rushed. He's tenderizing your character. He's seasoning your spirit. He's allowing the flavors of faith, patience, and endurance to marinate in your soul. And I need you to understand something. The quality of what comes out of the wait is directly proportional to what you do during the wait. You can waste your waiting season complaining, or you can invest your waiting season becoming. You can spend it bitter, or you can spend it better. Think about a farmer. He plants a seed. And then what does he do? He waits, but he doesn't just sit idle. He waters the ground. He tends the soil. He removes the weeds. He prepares for the harvest he hasn't seen yet. He works in partnership with the process. That's what you're called to do in your season of delay. Stop rehearsing what you don't have. Start preparing for what's coming. Stop looking at the empty space. Start getting ready for how you'll steward what God is about to release. Because the truth is, some of you aren't ready for what you're asking for. And that's not an insult, that's an observation of love. God loves you too much to give you something you can't handle. Something that would crush you under its weight. Something that would expose the cracks in your foundation. He's not withholding. He's fortifying. He's not punishing. He's positioning. He's not ignoring you. He's perfecting the timing so that when it comes, you'll be ready to receive it, steward it, and sustain it for the long haul. God doesn't give us things to lose them. He gives us things to multiply them. And multiplication requires maturity. It requires character development. It requires the capacity to handle weight without collapsing under pressure. Think about Joseph again. From the pit to Potiphar's house. From Potiphar's house to prison. From prison to the palace. Every stage was preparing him for the next. Every betrayal was building resilience. Every false accusation was refining his integrity. Every lonely night in that cell was forging the emotional strength he would need to forgive his brothers and lead a nation through famine. You see, when God delays your breakthrough, He's not denying your destiny. He's developing your capacity to carry it without it crushing you. I've watched people receive what they prayed for, only to watch it destroy them because they received it too soon. I've seen ministries collapse under the weight of rapid growth because the leader wasn't ready for the visibility. I've seen businesses fail not because the idea wasn't good, but because the owner hadn't yet developed the discipline to manage success. The delay is not your enemy. Immaturity receiving your destiny prematurely is your enemy. So when you find yourself frustrated with God's timing, I want you to ask yourself a different question. Instead of asking, why is this taking so long? Ask, what is this season producing in me that I'll need for the next one? Because I promise you there's always something. There's always a lesson in the waiting. There's always a character trait being refined. There's always a deeper level of trust being cultivated. There's always preparation happening beneath the surface that you can't see yet but will desperately need later. David didn't just wait in the wilderness. He learned to worship in isolation. He learned to lead sheep before he led people. He learned to fight lions and bears before he fought Goliath. He learned to survive Saul's jealousy before he wore Saul's crown. Every season of waiting was a classroom. Every hardship was curriculum. Every delay was actually advancement in disguise. And the same is true for you right now. You're sitting here today and you think you've been set back. You think you've lost time. You think the interruption has ruined your timeline. But let me tell you something that will shift your entire perspective. Asterisk. Asterisk, God doesn't work on your calendar. He works on his curriculum. Asterisk, asterisk. You wanted to be ready by last year. He knows you won't be ready until next year. You wanted the door to open in January. He knows the door needs to open in July. Because in those 6 months, he's preparing the room behind the door, and he's preparing you to handle what's in that room. You see, most people can't handle the weight of their own prayers. You pray for influence, but you can't manage your own emotions. You pray for wealth, but you can't manage a budget. You pray for a platform, but you panic when 10 people criticize you. So God says, I'm going to delay the answer until you can carry it without it crushing you. The delay isn't rejection. Asterisk. Asterisk. The delay is preparation meeting protection. Asterisk. Asterisk. Think about it. David was anointed king as a teenager, but he didn't wear the crown until he was 30. That wasn't a 15-year mistake. That was a 15-year masterclass. Caves taught him what palaces couldn't. Running from Saul taught him humility that a throne never would. He learned to worship in the wilderness so he wouldn't forget God in the palace. And here's what you need to understand. Asterisk. Asterisk, when God is preparing you for something big, he will often isolate you from something familiar. Asterisk. Asterisk. He'll pull you out of the crowd. He'll close doors to comfortable places. He'll disconnect you from people who celebrated your past, but can't facilitate your future. And it feels like punishment. It feels like exile. It feels like, God, did I do something wrong? Why am I alone? Why am I silent when I used to be surrounded? Because you're not being buried. You're being planted. Asterisk. Asterisk. And seeds don't grow in the spotlight. They grow in the dark, in the dirt, in the hidden place, where no one's watching and no one's applauding. But what happens in secret determines what manifests in public. God is doing a work in you that nobody can see yet. He's developing your character in private so that it can sustain your calling in public. Because here's what most people don't understand. Asterisk. Asterisk. Public success without private preparation is a recipe for public failure. Asterisk. Asterisk. I've watched it happen over and over again. Someone gets thrust into prominence before they're ready. They get the platform, the influence, the opportunity, but they don't have the character foundation to handle it. And what happens? They crumble, they fall, they self-destruct. Not because they weren't talented, not because they weren't anointed, but because the roots weren't deep enough to support the weight of the fruit. You see, asterisk, asterisk, the size of your tree is determined by the depth of your roots. Asterisk. Asterisk. And roots don't grow up toward the light. They grow down into the darkness. They push through hard soil. They break through rocks. They search for water in places nobody sees. That's why the hidden season isn't a punishment. It's a necessary preparation. Think about Joseph again. 17 years old, full of dreams, convinced he's destined for greatness. And then boom, his brothers throw him in a pit. They sell him into slavery. He ends up in Potiphar's house, and just when things are looking up, he gets falsely accused and thrown into prison. 13 years of waiting, 13 years of obscurity, 13 years where it looked like the dream was dead. But God was developing something in Joseph during those years that he could never have developed on a throne. Asterisk. Asterisk. He was building integrity. Asterisk. Asterisk. When Potiphar's wife tried to seduce him, Joseph had the character to say no, not because anyone was watching, but because he knew God was. He was learning to be faithful in secret so he could be trusted in public. And when Pharaoh finally called him out of prison, Joseph didn't just have a gift of dream interpretation. He had the wisdom to administrate He had the emotional maturity to forgive his brothers. He had the character to steward power without abusing it. Asterisk. Asterisk. The pit and the prison weren't detours. They were the curriculum. Asterisk. Asterisk. So if you're in a hidden season right now, ask yourself, what is God trying to develop in me that I couldn't learn any other way? What character is he building? What wisdom is he imparting? What unhealthy patterns is he breaking? What dependencies is he removing? What comfort is he providing in the absence? What strength is he building in the silence? You see, if you focus only on what you're missing, the breakthrough, the promotion, the relationship, the healing, you'll misinterpret the season. You'll think God has forgotten you. You'll believe the delay is denial. But if you shift your perspective and ask, what is God doing? Asterisk in me. Asterisk. While I wait for what he's promised. Asterisk to me. Asterisk. Everything changes. The wilderness becomes a classroom. The delay becomes preparation. The silence becomes sacred education. Let me tell you something that will transform how you see waiting. God is more concerned with who you're becoming than with what you're getting. He's more interested in your character than your comfort. He knows that if he gives you the promise before you're ready for it, the blessing will destroy you instead of develop you. I've watched it happen too many times. People who demanded the promise before its appointed time. They got what they wanted, but they weren't prepared for it. The business came, but they didn't have the wisdom to manage it. The platform came, but they didn't have the character to sustain it. The relationship came, but they didn't have the maturity to nurture it. And within months, sometimes weeks, what they fought so hard to get became the very thing that exposed what they lacked. That's why God makes you wait. Not to punish you. Not to test your patience just for the sake of patience. But to develop in you what you'll need to steward what he's about to release. Think about it like this. A farmer doesn't plant a seed today and demand fruit tomorrow. He understands that there's a process between planting and harvesting. There's germination. There's rooting. There's growth beneath the surface that no one sees. The farmer doesn't dig up the seed every day to check if it's growing. He trusts the process. He waters. He weeds. He waits. And when the harvest finally comes, it's not just because time passed. It's because the necessary development happened in the hidden season. That's you right now. You're in the soil. You're in the underground season. And I know it feels like nothing is happening, but beneath the surface, everything is happening. Roots are going deep. Strength is being established. Foundation is being laid. This is why some of you feel like nothing's happening right now. You're in the root phase. You're underground. Nobody sees you. Nobody's celebrating you. Nobody's clapping. There are no cameras, no applause, no recognition. But don't you dare abort the process just because it's not visible yet. The tree doesn't apologize for its seasons. It doesn't panic in winter. It doesn't question whether spring will come. It trusts the process that's built into its very nature. And you need to do the same thing. See, we've been conditioned by a microwave generation that everything should be instant. Fast food, fast money, fast success, fast fame. We want drive-through breakthrough. We want instant manifestation. But God doesn't operate a microwave. He operates a garden. And gardens have seasons. You can't rush a season. You can't intimidate a seed into growing faster. You can't threaten fruit into appearing before its time. There's a divine timing to everything, and your job isn't to control the timing. Your job is to stay faithful in the season you're in. I want you to write this down. The worst thing you can do is uproot yourself during the root season. The worst thing you can do is quit during the invisible phase. Because if you pull up a seed to see if it's growing, you destroy the very thing you were waiting for. So many people are switching jobs, switching churches, switching relationships, switching cities every time they hit resistance. They mistake pressure for punishment. They mistake the breaking of soil for the breaking of promise. And they keep starting over, never realizing that they were 3 inches from breakthrough. Let me tell you something about soil. Soil resists the seed. That's not the soil being mean. That's the soil doing its job. The resistance is what forces the seed to push harder, to go deeper, to develop strength. If there was no resistance, there would be no root system. And if there's no root system, there can be no fruit system. Stop running from resistance. Stop interpreting every difficulty as a sign you're in the wrong place. Maybe you're in the exact right place, and the pressure you feel is the proof that something's about to break through. Because breakthrough doesn't come to the comfortable. Breakthrough comes to the committed. It comes to the ones who stay planted when everything in them wants to run. It comes to the ones who keep pushing when the crowd has already given up. You want to know who inherits the promise? Not the most talented, not the most connected. The one who refuses to quit. The one who decides that the resistance is not rejection, it's preparation. The one who understands that pressure is not punishment, it's promotion in disguise. Think about Joseph again. 13 years between the dream and the fulfillment. 13 years. That's not a delay. That's a development program. Every betrayal taught him about human nature. Every false accusation taught him about integrity. Every night in that prison cell taught him to depend not on his circumstances, but on his character. When Pharaoh finally called him, he wasn't just ready, he was prepared. There's a difference. Ready is when you want it. Prepared is when you can handle it. And most people want the blessing, but they're not prepared for the weight of it. They want the platform, but they haven't developed the foundation. They want the influence, but they haven't built the character to sustain it. So God in His mercy keeps them in the process a little longer. Not to hurt them, but to help them. Not to deny them, but to develop them. You think you're being overlooked. God says you're being overseen. You think you're being forgotten. God says you're being formed. You think you're wasting time. God says you're being perfected in time. You think you're losing opportunities. God says you're avoiding distractions. You see closed doors and call it rejection. God calls it protection and redirection. I want you to understand something today. The very thing that frustrates you about your current season might be the exact thing that's preparing you for your future assignment. That job you didn't get, it wasn't yours. That relationship that ended, it wasn't designed to go where you're going. That business that failed, it was a classroom, not a cemetery. See, we want the crown without the crucible. We want the anointing without the assignment. We want the promotion without the proving ground. But God is too loving to give you something if you're not ready to steward. He's too wise to promote you before you're prepared. Think about it. Would you give a 16-year-old the keys to a Lamborghini just because they want it? No. Why? Because wanting something and being ready for something are two completely different realities. The wanting is in your heart, but the readiness is in your character. And God is more concerned about your character than your comfort. So right now, while you're waiting, God is working. While you're frustrated, He's forming. While you're questioning, He's qualifying you. Every challenge is building your capacity. Every setback is setting you up. Every closed door is keeping you from settling for less than what He's prepared for you. I've learned that God will often make you uncomfortable in a place that was once comfortable, because it's time to move. He'll frustrate you in a position that once satisfied you, because you've outgrown it. He'll create divine dissatisfaction because satisfaction breeds complacency, and complacency is the enemy of destiny. You see, the caterpillar doesn't choose the cocoon. The cocoon chooses the caterpillar. The season of transformation isn't convenient. It's not comfortable. But it's absolutely necessary. And if you fight the process, you'll delay the promise. Stop fighting the cocoon. Stop resisting the wilderness. Stop complaining about the waiting room. It's not wasting you. It's making you. It's not holding you back. It's holding you together until you're ready for what's ahead. You know what happens when you understand this? When you really get that, seasons are not punishments, but preparations. You stop fighting your life. You stop resenting where you are. You stop comparing your winter to someone else's summer. Because here's what I've learned through years of observing human potential. The people who maximize their seasons are the people who recognize what season they're in. They don't plant in winter. They don't harvest in spring. They work with the season, not against it. If you're in a winter season right now, if things feel dormant, if nothing seems to be moving, if doors are closed, don't despair. Ask yourself, what is this season teaching me? What roots am I developing that I couldn't develop in the spotlight? What character is being formed in me that only silence can produce? I've watched people waste entire seasons because they were too busy complaining about the season to learn from it. They spent their winter wishing for summer, and when summer came, they weren't ready. The fruit they could have borne was never developed because they refused the preparation of winter. But I've also watched people who embraced their season. They said, if this is winter, then I will go deep. If this is where God has me, then there's something here I need. And you know what happened? When their season changed, and it always does, they emerged transformed. They emerged with wisdom. They emerged with strength. They emerged with a depth that shallow, easy seasons could never produce. Your season is not your sentence. It's your school. And the moment you stop resisting it and start learning from it, everything changes. The pressure that felt like it was breaking you was actually breaking open the ground of your potential. The delay that felt like denial was actually divine orchestration, aligning you with the right timing. So wherever you are today, I want you to make peace with your season. Stop fighting against where you are and start learning from it. Because every season in your life is designed to teach you something that you cannot learn any other way. Winter teaches you resilience. Spring teaches you hope. Summer teaches you productivity. And fall teaches you release. The problem is we want to be in perpetual summer. We want constant harvest, constant growth, constant visibility. But that's not how nature works. And it's not how purpose works either. You cannot have continuous harvest without seasons of planting. You cannot have sustained growth without seasons of rest. And you cannot step into your next level without releasing what got you to this level. I've watched people destroy their future by refusing to release their past. They hold on to relationships that have expired. They cling to methods that no longer work. They remain in positions they've outgrown because they're afraid of the unknown. But here's what you need to understand. What got you here won't get you there. The tools that built one level of your life will not construct the next. You have to be willing to lay down the old to pick up the new. This is why transition seasons are so uncomfortable. You're being stretched between who you were and who you're becoming. You're standing in the gap between the familiar and the promised. And in that gap you feel like you belong nowhere. But that's precisely where transformation happens. The gap is not emptiness. It's expansion. It's your capacity being enlarged. It's your vision being upgraded. It's your character being refined for what's coming. So I'm asking you today, what are you holding on to that you need to release? What familiar comfort is preventing your divine assignment? What fear is disguising itself as wisdom? Because I promise you, on the other side of your surrender is your breakthrough. On the other side of your obedience is your overflow. On the other side of your faith is your fulfillment. Your purpose is not waiting for you to feel ready. It's waiting for you to decide. It's waiting for you to say yes to the call, even when you don't have all the answers. It's waiting for you to take the step, even when you can't see the full staircase. Because here's what I've learned after all these years of studying purpose and watching lives transform. The universe conspires with the committed. When you make a decision, a real decision, not a wish, not a hope, but a commitment sealed with action, things begin to shift. Doors you didn't even know existed suddenly appear. People you need cross your path at exactly the right moment. Resources materialize. Opportunities emerge. But none of that happens in the realm of maybe. None of that happens while you're sitting on the fence. 1 foot in your dream and 1 foot in your fear. The universe doesn't respond to intentions. It responds to decisions backed by movement. You see, there's a principle at work here that most people never understand. It's the principle of momentum. A parked car requires tremendous energy to get moving. But once it's moving, once it has momentum, it takes far less energy to keep it going. The hardest part is always the starting. The first step requires the most courage. The first action demands the most faith. That's why so many people never begin. They're waiting for it to feel easier. They're waiting for the fear to go away. They're waiting for more certainty, more clarity, more confidence. But here's what they don't realize. Confidence doesn't come before action. It comes during action. Clarity doesn't precede the journey. It emerges along the path. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision to move forward despite the fear. Think about every great achievement in history. None of them were born from perfect conditions. They were born from imperfect people making committed decisions in uncertain times. They were born from individuals who said, "I don't know how this will all work out, but I know I must begin." The Wright brothers didn't have all the answers when they started experimenting with flight. Rosa Parks didn't have a movement when she decided not to give up her seat. Mandela didn't have freedom when he chose to stand for justice. They had something more powerful than answers. They had conviction. They had purpose. They had a decision that refused to be undone by circumstances. And that's available to you right now. Not tomorrow. Not when you feel ready. Right now. This very moment is pregnant with possibility, heavy with potential, waiting for your yes.